Seid is a poet, photographer, and musician based in Pensacola, Florida. He wrote and recently released his first book, The Love Inseid, a collection of poetry and photography about reconnecting with the source within all of us. With the written word, Sean intertwines the spiritual universe with the physical, connecting ourselves again with the earth and transforming our human emotions into poetry that speaks with honesty and wisdom. Please welcome Sean Seid. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Voices and Visions. Today I am talking with Sean Seid.
Correct.
And I'm really excited to talk to you here today. We're outside in nature, it's really lovely, and I can't wait to do my first in-person interview. So Sean, you are a poet and a photographer, a painter, a musician. You're a lot of different things. And since you have a poetry book coming out very soon, I'd like to talk to you about writing poetry and what it means to you. Can you tell me, why do you write poetry?
So much of our experience we try to squeeze through language. We often feel like we have to be able to articulate what we're feeling or what we're thinking, what happened or what we want to happen. And language, particularly when it's used very logically or linearly, can be very constricting. And I suppose so much of my study in life is how to deconstrict or like liberate experience, because I really feel like as humans we are like funnels for grander experiences than we can often even contain. There's just so much going on even beyond the spectrums of our senses, and so I feel poetry is a vehicle to deconstruct, to melt, to play with language, to stretch beyond traditional meanings, to synthesize ideas and images that you might not ordinarily put together if you were thinking very logically, but in a way that can often be much more resonant or true or even cathartic in situations where we're trying to express those deep down kind of experiences or the abstracts of our internal experience.
Yeah, and can you tell me, what is the creative process for you when it comes to a poem? What is the initiator of an idea?
I think it depends upon like what type of workflow I'm in or like what I'm writing for or when I feel like I need to write. A large portion of this poetry was written really as a way to accompany images that I was producing. I got back into photography through the gentle persuasion of a friend, and I wanted to make them publicly available, but I wanted to have something more than just a simple caption. And so it really became initially like a weekly and then maybe at times even a daily writing exercise to create my image, which was usually a multiple exposure of a few different images, and then to write a poem about that image or about something related to or that was inspired by that image, or at times just things that were coming up for me in my day-to-day life. But really, I used primarily Instagram as a way to archive and organize my work. That way it wouldn't keep getting lost in various journals and burned along the way. Something that would actually allow me to accumulate and accrue enough of a body that I could eventually put a book together, which is the stage that we're at now.
Okay, yeah. In these interviews, one of my most common questions for any artist is, how long have you been creative? Have you always been creative? Because I think it's interesting whether creativity came to us very early in childhood, or if it's something that kind of we honed. It became more a part of us as we grew older because we were seeking some kind of new way to express ourselves as we
Hmm.
grew older. So what would you say, is art something that's been a part of your life since childhood?
Hmm. I think there are a couple different lenses to look at that. I remember, I was definitely very gifted in writing, and I was writing poetry from a very young age, which ironically, being told that you're a gifted child can often be very stunting for your growth because you feel like there's this role and this pressure to live up to. And so I ended up, after kind of like probably like around 9 to 11, when I started to become a gifted child, my creativity was really suppressed because I was afraid that I had to live up to some unrealistic expectation of perfection. And I remember, being afraid of drawing and painting as a kid, um, because it seemed like, all of the other kids were much more talented at it. And again, this is like a very common narrative that especially comes up in our culture of, if you're not good at something immediately, then you shouldn't do it, which has really been a large part of like my adult life, is undoing those narratives and realizing, that creativity is inherent in being. We can't help, we are, in a sense, we've been created by the natural, by this world, by the universe. And just by the very act of being, we're co-creating, we're manipulating, we're moving things around, we're making sounds, we're ingesting and digesting information, and then we're synthesizing new things that come out of our unique sense of being. And so I think really the fallacy of the Western philosophy is that some people are creative, or that creativity is a sometimes operation, which, I really feel like every single moment and what you're doing in every single moment can be viewed through that lens of creativity. And you can even see that in people who have, um, what you might consider like a mundane profession, like being a mechanic. These people can be incredibly artistic
Yeah.
in the way that they approach their work, and it can almost become like a flow state or music to them. And so I think, like I said, one of the messages that I really want to share with people is that we're all artists. I really feel like everybody is an artist, and we're just at various stages of coming to acknowledge, appreciate, and admit that.
Yeah, yeah. That's a beautiful way of looking at things, and very powerful. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey as a photographer?
Mm-hmm.
And I know you said you got into that more recently.
There were different phases. When I first got to college, photo was one of the first art classes that I took, and I learned how to use a film camera and to play in um, the dark room. And that was really exciting for me to go through that very magical and mysterious practice of learning about how cameras are actually ingesting this light and then transmitting it onto film, and how you have to be so careful and methodical to try to get that through the dark room process. And then you have something, that is really really unique. And a well done film photo just has this gravity to it that is really profound. And so after college, I just got into taking photos more regularly. Of course, cell phones became much more
Yeah.
powerful every year, and it became more accessible than having a bulky DSLR around, which I did play with. But ultimately, I found, that a cell phone was much more accessible, and therefore allowed me to be more in the experience of my everyday
Yeah,
life.
more
And
creative. Yeah.
hmm yeah, to be able to constantly have that artist's eye on, of like, oh, look how the light is hitting that, or look at the juxtaposition of these objects. And so I think probably in the early days of Facebook, that was one of my favorite games, was creating interesting photos and learning how to use different filters. But ultimately what continued to draw me was multiple exposures, because I feel like multiple exposures allow you to put two things that might be ordinary or mundane together, and when you put them together, they create something that's much more magical or much more alive if you were to see them separately. And so, again, cell phones became really incredible, and um, maybe about 2 years ago, I found an app called Seid. I highly recommend it to anybody who's interested in being more creative in their photography, because the tools are very accessible and easy and very powerful. And so I was very resistant to social media for a long time, and then, a good friend of mine, like I said, gently persuaded me to start creating and making that publicly available again. And so I approached Instagram as a platform to really focus on creativity and sharing the unique expression of creativity that comes from me, as only one individual can.
How about we talk about spirituality? Because I think that's something that a lot of people in the art community is interested in, and there's definitely like a sector of spiritual artists out there. And I assume you consider yourself a spiritual person.
It goes right back to what we were just talking about with creativity. It's like, I think that the underlying belief that I have is that we're all spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the the early stages of realizing your spiritual nature, I think, is kind of fraught with that type of identification that creates an us and them mentality. But ultimately, I feel so many people eventually come to the realization of like, oh, everybody is here having a spiritual experience. And even, what we might call the mundane or the drudgerous, that's just as much holy or miraculous as anything else. But I would say, yeah, that a large part of my art, my creativity, is really about that consciousness that goes beyond just being a YOLO human. That there's so much more to experience, and so a lot of my poetry, in particular, is really, when I'm talking about love, I think love is an umbrella word that can very easily lose meaning if you're not sure what you're talking about. And so I think for me, love is like a doorway that invites you into the realization that we're emanating from a common source, and that even as we see each other as different individuals, really we are of a unified consciousness. And the perceptions that we have of our differences and the things that separate us from each other and from the world around us, I think that these are all just aspects of illusion that our path ultimately allows us to detach from and to see through and to perceive a greater reality.
Yeah. And can I ask what initiated this kind of spiritual way of looking at the world for you?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, it definitely was not being raised in the Baptist church. I remember we went to church every Sunday until I was maybe about 9, and I hated it. It was. I don't know if I understood then, but I think I had a sense of the hypocrisy. That we were talking about this character. The whole religion is built around Jesus Christ, who had all of these messages of loving each other, and then there were so many messages within the church of hate and separation and judgment and fear, so much fear. And so even as a child, it felt like we were just kind of going through the motions, and that the energy of that particular belief system wasn't really compelling or resonant to me. And so I think, like a lot of teens, I went through different phases of like, oh, I'm atheist. There's nothing besides this experience. Okay, well, maybe I'm agnostic. I'm too small to have a perception of what's going on. And then, through the experiences of my life, I had felt experiences of being loved more than I could comprehend. I had felt experiences of connections between the natural world and myself, and between people. There experiences of synchronicity and magnetism, and just things that defied explanation or comprehension, but let me know that there's something much more important happening here than being a law-abiding citizen and a
Yeah.
good taxpayer and consuming what you need to consume
Yeah.
before you die. It really, I think that lens is what allows me to keep my life in perspective.
Yeah. I guess my question is like, how do you put your perspectives and spiritual insights into your art?
Hmm. In our world, there's a lot of emphasis on what we're doing, and we try to find value in what we've accomplished or what we're accomplishing, what we can show that we have a degree for or that we have merit from. There's just a lot of focus on the doing and not as much focus on the being. But I feel that when people begin to tune into just being and reconnecting with that naturalness and not needing or having anything that has to be done um, to find some sense of value or worth, to recognize that in just being, all of the worth that we could ever really desire is already there, we begin to connect with who we really are. And then what we do just becomes a reflection or expression of that depth, of that trueness, of that realness. So I would say, the messages that are getting into my art are just a reflection of who I am as I'm currently allowing myself to be.
Yeah. Getting back to, art, I know you do some teaching. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I've been doing a once a month workshop behind empathic practice um, called Art in the Garden. And really, it's been using different mediums. We've only done 2 thus far, watercolor and then collage. And really, the art portion is just a backdrop through which to explore playfulness, mindfulness, and really like liberating our inner child to be able to create and feel inspired again. And so these workshops have really been, for me, sort of a beta testing of a larger tree that I've been dreaming for a long time, and that's actually what I plan to do for the first part of my release party, is have a full-length workshop that is going to include mindfulness and meditation, which is sort of my background as a yoga teacher and meditation practitioner, but also art expression, singing, dancing, moving, group dynamics, one-on-one sort of authentic conversations, improvisation, really weaving playfulness and mindfulness together as a way to explore life with a greater sense of spontaneity, like openness to the raw of the moment, rather than constantly coming from a lot of like pre-programmed patterns that feel safe and predictable, but ultimately end up leading to very limited experiences and often kind of a dry experience of life.
Yeah, yeah. So you do poetry, reciting. Is that something you do a lot of?
Yeah, the open mic scene here in Pensacola is really phenomenal. I mean, I don't really know what it's like in other cities. I just know that over the course of the past 8 or 9 years, I've been rocked by the talent in this town. And I think that constantly being in touch with those inspirational people, those artists really, that time and time again show up to share their heart and their soul through the vehicle of their work, has really helped to grow me and inspire me and keep me to keep me evolving, to realize that there's always growth potential, and we don't need to compare ourselves. It's not really a competition, but when somebody does something inspirational, it reminds us what we're all really capable of.
So we're in Pensacola, Florida, and what do you love about this community so much?
I think what I love about this community that I've really found here, just probably because I've been here long enough to find these various characters that are circling throughout our community, and I'm sure they're really everywhere, and you just have to be able to find them. But I think that there are people who have reached a point in their path where they feel like they are literal magic, and it's because they're just authentic, they're genuine, they're real, they're honest, they show up in the moment, they're present, they share who they really are. They're not really hiding so much behind those veils. And what impresses me about this particular community is just how many of them there are. And like I said, not even needing to be an artist, but you know, when someone is living their life artistically, which is to say, when they're really doing their inner work, their inner healing to be able to show up as themselves, that to me is like one of the greatest joys in life, because it's that allows us to actually truly connect with one another. Otherwise, conversations can be more alienating than connecting, but with all of these beautiful people that I've come to know in this particular community, I feel very held and seen and supported, really part of a family, in the context of a deeper sense of family than I had ever really even known through a biological family.
Yeah. What would you suggest to someone who wants to get into poetry?
The first thing that comes to mind is that there's a poem, I believe it's in my book, and it says something to the effect of, a poem doesn't have to be much. It doesn't have to change the world or move the masses. It's just an opportunity to tell the truth. Or not. And so I feel like, to anybody who's curious or interested in poetry, just do it. If you need it, if you feel like lost in the woods because there are so many different types of poems and ways to approach poetry, and it can really be quite open-ended, and to somebody who's not used to that, start with something simple like a haiku, just 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. Create enough of a framework to allow yourself to start feeling confident and comfortable to start a piece and end a piece. And really, I think that it's with anything, it comes with a daily practice, or weekly, or however often you can commit to it. Just showing up for that, you'll begin to work off the layers of sludge and slurry that will be in the way. Don't be afraid of writing garbage. It's going to feel like that. But it's not, because it's part of the process of uncovering your genuine voice. So yeah, I think that's my primary advice is just Nike, just do it.
Awesome. Yeah.
And let go of judgments, or at least just learn how to observe those judgments as they arise, and recognize, that poetry is an incredible medium, because it really does have a capacity to reveal things from your own subconscious. A little bit like dreaming can reveal messages that you might have even locked away from yourself.
Who inspires you, either as a person or creatively,
I mean, there's a long list, I'm sure, but Ram Dass is probably one of my most prominent teachers in my life. Just the way that he approached his life with really like a fixation upon how do we get to the genuine experience, how do we get to actually perceive reality, and then realizing that so much of that is actually discovering love and opening yourself up to, opening your heart up to love, and then learning how to love anything and everyone. Every part of your path becomes just more grist for the mill, or fodder for your practice to help you grow. It totally reshapes your perception from things happening to you to everything happening for you. And it reminds me, that that I'm part of a larger experience than just me as Seid from birth to death, and that this really is, even in the moments that don't seem like it, everything that's happening, as Albert Einstein said, either nothing is a miracle or it all is. And, I guess I come from the school of thought that this is all really rather miraculous. And so any teacher like that continues to look out past the veil and remind us that there's more happening here. But big props to Ram Dass today.
Yeah. All right. Well, awesome. Now, to end this interview off, I would like to ask if you could recite at least one poem from your book.
Sure. There's a simple one that I remember. When I say that I love you, I mean I love you right now. Not just in destiny dreams or in clouds of could-be's. I'm not sitting around waiting for you to bring me jugs of milk and honey. I love you even if you bring nothing more to drink than the salt of your struggle. And even with all of your room to grow, when I say I love you, it's because I want you to know. You are not alone. So from the front door of my heart, hear me calling. Welcome home. Welcome home.
That was awesome. Thank you, Sean. This has been great.
Thank you, Avery.
All right. I will see you again on another episode of Voices and Visions. This is Sean Seid, and we will see you later. Bye-bye.